Hello. Here we are at the beginning of our path. It's to learn about hazardous materials and hazardous materials events. So to work on any of that, we need to understand by definition what a hazardous material and a hazardous material event are. So we're going to be looking at national standards and NFPA, national regulations and NFPA standards. So let's look first at what the book definition is. So per NFPA, a hazardous material is matter in a solid, liquid, or gas, or energy that when released is capable of creating harm to people, the environment, and property, including weapons of mass destruction. The NFPA goes on further to explain what weapons of mass destruction are. Defined in Code 18 of Section 2332A, as well as many other criminal use in hazardous materials, such as illicit labs, environmental crimes, or industrial sabotage. Well, that's a mouthful, isn't it? How about this? Hazardous materials are things that are bad that can hurt you, the property, or the environment. Now, they can be contained or they can be out of their actual containment. And that's when we start talking about a hazardous materials emergency. So what is a hazardous materials emergency? A hazardous materials emergency is when we have a hazardous material, any of the dangerous methyl bad stuff, and it actually comes out of our container. So the question comes down to, if I see a 55-gallon drum on the side of the street, is that a hazardous materials emergency? I would say no. That's an environmental cleanup situation, and that's where Department of Ecology or others may need to get involved. But for us in the emergency response field, that is not an emergency per se. Now, if somebody decides to go and rip that stuff open and spill it out into the creek, now it has become an emergency, and it is our part that we have to take care of the cleanup and the response to it. So it may be important for us to take care of containers that we see discarded and contact the proper cleaning response agencies, such as Department of Ecology. So that's a hazardous material and a hazardous materials emergency. Now, the whole thing, when we sit there and think about a hazardous materials emergency in itself, is it's that product that is released from the container. We are responding to the released contents. We have to watch out for the energy contained there within the container. We have to worry about the actual product itself harming us, property, or the environment. We need to make sure to take steps to make sure that we are safe, that the environment is safe, that property and the public is safe. That's the ultimate thing that we're looking at right there. The ultimate thing that we want to care about when we talk about this, when we respond to these hazardous materials emergencies, and why we are doing this ongoing training, is because they can be much more complex than a normal emergency. Let's think about a car accident. I end up going on a traditional car accident, two-car T-bone fender bender, and there's no release of any product at all. We just have to worry about patient care assessment. We have to worry about our own public safety by coordinating off the road and making sure we stage our apparatus properly. But we don't need to worry about the hazardous materials response. If the same exact accident were to occur and a fuel tank were to get ruptured, or an oil tank, or the radiator of the car, which happens many times, we now have a hazardous materials event. We still think of this as a traditional car accident, but now we have the added difficulty of making sure that the environment, property, and people are not harmed by those hazardous materials. So we end up pulling out an 1 3/4 hose line to protect against fire. We end up doing damming and diking of the storm drains around the area to make sure it doesn't hurt the fishies. So that's what we're looking at when we talk about a hazardous material and we look at a hazardous materials event. So we know that a hazardous materials event is much more extensive than a traditional event. We have to take a few more steps into it. And that's what we need to know about hazardous materials and hazardous materials events.
December 2nd, 1984. The Union Carbide India Limited pesticide plant in Bhopal, India. Water inadvertently entered a storage tank containing more than 80,000 pounds of methyl isocyanate, or MIC, which was known to react violently with water. This caused a runaway reaction that overheated the tank and resulted in a massive toxic gas release. A dense, lethal cloud drifted over the city of Bhopal, exposing hundreds of thousands of people to deadly MIC and other chemicals. An estimated 3,800 people died immediately, and tens of thousands were injured. Eventually, thousands more died from toxic gas-related illnesses in what had become history's worst industrial accident. Investigations found many process safety management deficiencies, including the absence of a process hazard analysis, poorly maintained equipment and safety systems, a lack of emergency response planning, and inadequate training for operators handling the deadly MIC. But others saw a deeper root cause. The father of process safety, the late Dr. Trevor Kletz, wrote, "MIC wasn't a raw material or a product, but an intermediate. Storing it was convenient, but not essential. It could have been used as it was made. Then the worst leak would have been a few kilograms." The huge MIC release at Bhopal was a watershed event in the drive to make plant designs inherently safer. In the wake of Bhopal, Congress enacted new laws to increase chemical emergency preparedness and to require companies to develop process safety and risk management programs and to report their worst-case release scenarios. Congress also established the Chemical Safety Board to investigate chemical accidents and recommend measures to prevent catastrophes. But despite these positive actions in the 1990s, the United States continues to experience serious chemical accidents. Even now, CSB investigations following major accidents find deficiencies in design and process safety management similar to those uncovered in Bhopal. In 2008, an explosion killed 2 workers and injured 8 others at a pesticide plant in Institute, West Virginia, that was originally developed by Union Carbide. The explosion took place during a lengthy startup process when a runaway chemical reaction occurred inside a waste treatment vessel. The CSB's investigation found that factors similar to those reported in Bhopal led to the explosion, including incomplete operator training and procedures. In 2012, a massive fire put workers' lives at serious risk at a refinery in Northern California. The CSB found that the company repeatedly failed over a 10-year period to upgrade corroded piping using inherently safer materials. Eventually, the pipe became so thin it ruptured. And in 2013, 15 people were killed and more than 200 were injured from an ammonium nitrate explosion in West Texas. The explosion caused widespread damage to homes, schools, and businesses up to a half-mile away. Similar to the Bhopal disaster, emergency response plans were inadequate, and community members were not aware of the potential hazard in their midst.
Now we can see from history how bad a hazardous materials release can be. Obviously, these are some more of the extreme events, but we still need to identify and understand that most hazmat events can typically be more complex than traditional events. We are now mentally prepared to perform actions to protect people, property, and the environment, thereby saving the fishies. I'd like to thank the CSB for the production of the associated video. This has been Chris Pfaff with PHRT Instruction. Now let's get started.